Welcome y'all to Robin on the Farm. Today I'm making some apple cider bread. This bread is similar to a cinnamon raisin bread, but that apple cider adds a little something extra to it. It's kind of special and I love it at this time of year. I'm going to use my bread machine to make this bread. I'm going to use the dough cycle, but you can just as easily totally make it in your bread machine. I just like using the dough cycle because I think you just get a little bit better finished product. So that's what I like to do, but this bread turns out great totally in your bread machine too. So let's just get started on the recipe. It's really simple and really yummy, and it's gonna smell so good in your home while it's baking. We're gonna start with 1 cup of apple cider, okay? So 1 cup of apple cider, pour that right on in there. It smells so good. It smells like cloves and nutmeg. Ooh, smells good. Now, I did heat this up. I heated it up in my microwave for about 45 seconds. So you want to take that chill off. That'll help your yeast to activate and it'll help your bread to rise. So definitely take the chill off, put it in your microwave for about 45 seconds. Next, we're going to use 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Some good old brown sugar, 2 tablespoons. Put it right on into your bread machine loaf pan. There we go. 2 packed tablespoons. Next, we want 2 tablespoons of melted butter. Let's put that right on in there. You can also use 2 tablespoons of oil if you want to. Just 2 tablespoons of any kind of fat. That's going to help your bread turn out great. So I'm using 2 tablespoons of melted butter. And our next ingredient is flour. I'm going to use 3 cups of flour. Now normally when I make this bread I use bread flour, but today I'm going to use all-purpose flour just because my bucket of bread flour is empty and I didn't go down to the basement to pull out another one. Okay, so 3 cups. This is going to make about a 1.5 pound loaf, but in the description I will leave the recipe and I'll include the recipe for a 2 pound loaf, a 1.5 pound loaf, and a 1 pound loaf. Okay, so 3 cups in this 1.5 pound loaf. I buy my bread flour and my all-purpose flour in 25-pound bags of flour, and then I just pour them into these 5-gallon buckets, and I put these nice gamma lids on top, and they just twist, and it keeps everything so nice and clean in my pantry. The 25-pound bags fit perfectly in these 5-gallon buckets, so that's a good option if you want to buy in bulk and have a lot of flour on hand for all your bread making. Next, I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of salt. This is my Redmond's Fine Ancient Sea Salt that I've been using a lot lately that I really like, but you can use your plain old white table salt. Okay, so 1 teaspoon of salt, any kind you want. And next I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. This bread has a lot of flavor. All of the spices that are already in the apple cider, so good. Okay, so 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Let's put that right in there. And next I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of apple pie spice. If you don't have any of this, just add a little bit more nutmeg and cloves if you want to, or just a little bit more cinnamon. I just think this makes it really good. So this is apple pie spice from 1992. Oh goodness, I've been using all of my mother-in-law's old spices. She recently moved and my husband brought home a bunch of the stuff that was in her freezer, so I'm using all of her old spices and they are good. She stored them in the freezer for all these years and they are great. So I'm gonna add this 1 teaspoon of apple pie spice. I will put substitutes for this if you don't have any in the recipe. I forgot to mention at the beginning when I added my apple cider, I gave this recipe to one of my friends and she thought that it was apple cider vinegar. So don't do that. It is not apple cider vinegar. Could you imagine a bread with a whole cup of apple cider vinegar in it? Gross. So this is just good old apple cider that's very similar to apple juice, but with all the good seasonings and it's been baked down. So don't use apple cider vinegar. Okay, next we want some yeast. I'm gonna add 2 1/4 teaspoons of this active dry yeast. This is my Red Star active dry yeast. I store it in the freezer and I get it out to make bread. 2 1/4 teaspoons. If you use the packets of yeast, you can just use 1 packet. That's the same amount. And you can also use instant yeast in this bread just fine. You can just substitute it exactly 2 1/4 teaspoons. These are all the ingredients I'm going to add so far. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get my dough cycle going. I'm just going to choose the dough cycle and press start. This dough cycle is going to take about an hour and a half, and it's going to mix everything up, knead it, let it rise, and when it's done, it'll be ready to punch down and shape, put in a loaf, and then let it rise one more time and then throw it in the oven. So I love using the dough cycle. It is so great. Makes your bread machine just that much more fun to use because you can either make your bread totally in the bread machine or you can use it and make it in the oven. I love that. Like I said, I think you get a little bit better product at the end when you bake it in the oven. But I am also going to add some raisins to this apple cider bread. I love the addition of raisins to this. It just gives it that much better flavor. So while this is mixing up, I'm going to go ahead and get my raisins ready. I'm going to use a cup of raisins in this recipe. Now, if you just put the raisins in there, then the raisins could fall to the bottom and all your raisins could be stuck at the bottom of your loaf when it's all done. So I'm going to add some cinnamon. I'm going to just toss these raisins in some cinnamon, and that's going to help them to kind of disperse throughout the loaf, and then you won't have a big clump of raisins anywhere in your loaf. You can use the white raisins, you can use craisins like the dried cranberries. That's really good in this loaf too. I do that a lot too. But I'm going to add 1 cup of raisins. Into that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Now, a lot of times you can toss whatever mix-in you're going to put in some flour. But because this bread already has cinnamon and all these flavors in it, I'm going to use the cinnamon. So I'm just going to kind of toss these up. And like I said, this is just going to keep your raisins from clumping together, falling to the bottom. This is a really good help, and it gives them more flavor. And I think that's always a good thing in this bread. Okay, these are ready. This dough cycle is going to go for about 15 minutes, and then it's going to signal, it's going to beep for me to add a mix-in. Now, of course, every bread machine is different. You might have a little compartment that you can put your mix in at the beginning and it'll just add it automatically, or maybe yours has the signal. If yours doesn't, go ahead and put these in about 10 or 15 minutes after your bread starts to knead, after you start your bread machine. That'll work just fine. You do want to give this dough a little bit of time to form its gluten, because when you add mix-ins, it can actually slice those gluten strands and then your bread won't rise as well. So that's why you add mix-ins later on in the cycle. So in just a minute, I'm going to check on my ball of dough, make sure it's not too wet or too dry. And then I will wait for the mix-in signal and I will add these raisins that are covered in cinnamon. It already smells so good in here. Y'all are going to really like this bread. Okay, my bread machine has been going for about 12 minutes. I'm just checking on my ball of dough. Look how good it looks. It's not too wet, it's not too dry, it's looking nice and smooth. It's tacky but not sticky, so this is exactly what I want it to look like. If yours is sticking to the sides and the bottom, then you need to add just a little bit more flour. I like to say maybe 1/8 of a cup more flour just to get started, and then let it mix around for a few more minutes and try to get it to look like this. If yours is not smooth at all and it's kind of crumbly and not coming together, add about 1 tablespoon of water. But this is looking good. Now I'm just going to wait for the mix-in signal and I will know to add my raisins. Okay, do you hear that? That is the mix-in signal. Now I know to add my raisins. Okay, so here are my raisins. I'm just going to dump them in, and this machine is going to take care of the rest. The raisins are just about incorporated in there. Now, if you are using your bread machine to totally make this loaf of bread, you can just shut the door, and in about 2.5 hours, your bread is going to be ready. For me, I'm going to use the dough cycle, so I'm going to shut this door, and in about 1 hour and 10 minutes, it is going to be time to punch this dough down and shape it and get it in a loaf. So I will let you see it at that point. Okay, y'all, it's been 1.5 hours, and here is the dough for our apple cider bread. Doesn't this look good? Okay, now it's time just to turn it out from the bread machine loaf pan. Oh, look at all those raisins and all that cinnamon. This looks good. Okay, now it's time just to press out the dough. I have my dough mat right here, so I know it's nice and clean. I don't have to worry about dirty countertops or anything like that. Okay, so I'm gonna press this out. You wanna get all the little air bubbles out, and I want this to be about as long as my bread loaf pan. This is my cast iron bread loaf pan. This is what I always use. I love cast iron. It doesn't have any of those chemicals to get into our foods. I poured a little bit of oil in there and then spread it all over with a paper towel. I greased up the sides and everything like that. So it is ready for our dough to go in. And I am just gonna simply roll it up. Gonna roll it up into a nice tight log. Oh, this smells so good. This apple cider bread, oh, this is such a good treat. Okay, so it's rolled up nice and tight. This will give you really nice surface tension and a really pretty loaf of bread when it's all done baking. Now I'm just gonna tuck in my sides a little bit. Just pinch the seams together on both sides. It'll keep it from bursting while it's baking. Flip it over, get this seam really nice and pinched together. Kind of smack it down on your countertop. This will help it to relax. You definitely don't have to be gentle with your bread at this point. And now it's ready to throw into the loaf pan. So here's my greased up loaf pan. Just plop it on in there. There we go. Now I am gonna leave this on my counter. I'm not gonna cover it up or anything. I'm gonna let this rise for about 20 to 30 minutes. And while it's rising, I'm gonna go ahead and get my oven preheated to 350 degrees. And I will show it to you when it's ready to throw into the oven. This apple cider bread has been rising for about 30 minutes and it is looking good. You can see that it's peeking up over the edges of the pan and it's ready to go into the oven. So I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees and I'm gonna let this bake for about 30 minutes. Our apple cider cinnamon bread is fresh out of the oven. I just pulled it out and look how good it looks. Doesn't that look so good? I love this bread and I wish that y'all could smell it. It smells so good. Look how nicely it came out of the cast iron loaf pan. Look at that. Chock full of raisins. Like I said, you can use craisins. Oh, doesn't that look good? Okay, this loaf looks fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna just put it there. It's so hot right now. I like to take a pat of butter and just rub it all over the crust. This will give you a nice soft crust and it'll also give you that pretty shine and a really good buttery flavor. So this is a win-win-win right here. Now you can definitely melt your butter and brush it on and do it that way. This is the easy way, so that's what I like to do. Once you have your bread brushed with butter, then I like to go ahead and cover it with a tea towel instead of putting it on a cooling rack or anything like that. This will just let that warmth and the condensation from the bread just give you a nice soft crust, and I really like that. So if you like soft crust, go ahead and cover it with the tea towel. If you like it a little crunchier, maybe put it on a cooling rack. Now, to have the best crumb when you cut into your bread, you want to let it cool completely. But honestly, who can do that? I have been smelling this bread bake for 30 minutes. All my family's been smelling it. My entire house smells like apple cider and nutmeg and ginger, and just these fantastic smells are coming from this bread. So I'm ready to cut into this bread. So that's what I'm gonna do today. All right, I just grabbed my pretty oak cutting board that my husband made me, and I'm gonna cut my bread on it. Oh my goodness, like I said, this bread smells so good. And remember, if you let it cool all the way, you're gonna have a better crumb, but who can stand it? I can't stand it. Oh my goodness, look at that. Doesn't that look nice? Looks great. Oh, it smells even better now. I'm gonna cut another little piece. Oh, this bread is so soft and so nice. There it is. Doesn't that look good? It has the raisins dispersed all throughout it. It's not all at the bottom or anything like that. Lots of spices all mixed in. I can see the cinnamon and oh, doesn't that look good? Hopefully you can see it really well. That looks incredible. Okay, I'm gonna take a little bite. This bread is worth making. This is so good. It's very similar to cinnamon raisin bread, but it actually has a little bit lighter texture and it has a little bit more flavor, and I think it's really good. It's that apple cider. So yummy. I will put the recipe for this apple cider cinnamon raisin bread down in the description. And like I said, I'll make a 1 pound loaf, a 1.5 pound loaf, and a 2 pound loaf. I'll leave the recipes for all of those so that you can make this bread. You can make it totally in your bread machine. You can get it out like I did and use the dough cycle. Like I said, I really like using the dough cycle. I think you get better bread out of that. But do whatever you're comfortable with and what works for you. Definitely let that bread machine work however you want it to work for you. This is yummy. This is worth making. Try it out and let me know how you like it. It's great at this time of year. This also is a great neighbor gift if you want to make this bread and wrap it up nicely in a nice bag and put a ribbon on it and a Christmas card. This would be really appreciated. Thank you so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I will see you next time. These are the bread bags that I like to use to keep my bread nice and fresh. They're also great for giving this bread away as gifts. You can add some ribbon or a bow, a nice Christmas tag, and your neighbors will love it. I'll put the link in the description so you can easily find them.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that